Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Unslaved. We have another episode here for you today. We're going to be covering one of Michael's new articles, A God in Ruins, talking about an idea that is rather controversial, but it needs to be discussed, which is the idea of human de-evolution. We're constantly talking about human evolution, but it's important that we also look at it from a much more realistic perspective. And Michael, we've got some notes prepared for people to get into this subject. You've written this article. Let's sketch out maybe a little introduction for people that might be new to this concept.
Yeah, thanks, David. Sure, it's another, it's an alternative theory, another one, and that's true, and it's a good description. Although you call anything alternative theory today, and already that's going to disturb, right, a lot of minds, because we're on the lineman now between the masses of the world getting into subjects like what we deal with, and our members, say, and ourselves, who are a little bit way more familiar, right, who've been already exposed to this for years, so it doesn't come as any kind of shock. Say you're talking about, Walter Russell or the ether coming back into fashion, or black matter or dark matter, and the open mind says, yeah, I've not parked that. I've not done like scientists and mainstream said and just said, okay, because we tunnel vision in a particular direction, like say quantum theory or socialism and politics, that then everything else automatically became completely redundant forever, which of course is lunacy, isn't it? That's not intelligence. Intelligence is widening the circle of understanding, not narrowing it. But in the name of narrowing it, and again, that metaphor about the quantum guys really fits, in their hurry, right, in their absolute breakneck hurry to get to the limits of their quantum theory, they just, like tunneling beavers or moles, right, just chucked over the side anything else that a Tesla or Walter Russell or 100 others, by the way, they were locked out. Right? Wagons were circled, and these other thinkers were left out of the picture, right? And then these characters, these Rutherfords, Heisenbergs, Dirac's, whatever, they reached the limit of their paradigm that was also important and also funded, and then sit around going, did you bring any dominoes? Did you want to play some bridge or some cards? We got much to do right now, although the funding's still pouring in. And then suddenly they go, I hate to say this, lads, but we're going to have to backtrack and sort of scavenge all of that stuff we chucked away. Remember that Tesla? And everybody grimaces. But this is what's happened in science over and over again. In the hurry towards a paradigm of, what do they call it? Theory of everything. Look, we had just a Kosh on who said theory of nothing. You haven't even started, right? But in the rush to the theory of everything, so much beautiful stuff was thrown overboard that now they got to come back. The dark matter theory is bankrupt. Oh, what about all the money that was spent on that then? Well, you had Nazim Haramein, you could explain it all from the start. Back, forth, upside down, inside out. Don't see him getting any major funding, and people of that kind. Well, it's the same with this. It's an alternative theory that has been jettisoned and thrown out. It's not that I believe it, but I've been intrigued by it. It makes a lot of sense to me. As a matter of fact, if you show a slide there, we did an interview with Michael Cremo a while back, and I think we touched on it, right? We touched on it. We were too focused on his other work into archaeology, forbidden archaeology, which alone would take program after program. But actually, Michael Cremo wrote another book called Human Devolution. I've read it many times. Fascinating. I was familiar with some of the precepts because Michael's take on it is from his own religious background, right? He's a Hindu, and therefore it's very, very central to Hindu philosophy. Haven't we had on a guest, I think it was Angel Perez, that was talking about the, yugas. Well, that ties in. You see, Michael Cremo's coming at the evolution from this point of view, because in their theory of time, it's not so much a linear progress, although it can appear like that when you're living it out. It's really a cyclical process. They're not the only ones to have this, but it goes from these golden ages, allegedly, right through to, these dark ages where allegedly we are now. And that's always fascinated me as well. Not because I bought into it, but because I'm looking for holes in it. I'm looking to say, Jesus, if this is true, then we all need to believe it. But in that process, we, guess what? Think the opposite. We embody the complete antithesis, not because we're throwing it into the mud, but because we've reverently picked it up to find out maybe what have you missed. Hindu priest, Michael Cremo, whatever. Hey, I might be able to substantiate your theory. That's what we did with the Mayan calendar. Didn't mean I believed it. Like all the, the characters that came after me at that time. I'm just reciting what others believe, dope, right? And I'm actually bringing it up because I want to look at it. I want to look at whether it has a modicum of truth. And we found out that it does have some truth, but it doesn't in some other respects. That's all I've ever asked. And it's the same with this theory. I've known about it for years. Can't remember where. Probably because I'm from a Steiner background, so it just comes in the blood with groups like that. But I've never worn it, a T-shirt of, I believe in devolution. That's where my thinking ends. Because to do that would mean that you'd have to subscribe to a lot of other, theories, like in Hinduism, all which I certainly do not do. So you see, if you buy into one part of a dogma, the trouble is there you have to buy into the whole lot of it. Yeah, I buy into vegetarianism. I buy into a little bit of, the idea of that this realm, right, might be a fallen realm. I've looked into all of that, but I've come up with counter arguments like Alvin Boyd Kuhn telling you, I'll tell you exactly why the world has fallen, because that's the way you want it to look. Not that it is fallen, but your perception makes it so. I'm into that. That sounds like phenomenal, right? And most of the world hasn't gone there. So it's the same with devolution. I'm very interested in the theory, but let's see what a Steiner had to say. What about, a Professor Tom? What about the names that I list in the article? They've all, even if they don't even know they're talking about devolution, they are. Because if you can track a certain mathematical measurement through the world, right? And this one he was just focusing on the megalithic yard. But you think that's where it stops? It's all the measurements, not just the megalithic yard, megalithic mile, and megalithic inch. It's lots of other ones, like Akash was saying, was involved in the pyramid. We've had Scott Onstad verify that. We've had Ralph Ellis with his unique theory on that. And we were going to interview other people, but their internet connection was shit, so we didn't get there. But had they been able to talk, they would have been saying, yes, there's many more measurements, like the meridian triangle in the pyramid. The fact that a 13.5 acre building on its own, forget anything built, that is the pyramid. The foundation of that building alone is miraculous, as is the foundation of the Sphinx. They cover 13.5 acres, and they're aligned to all the cardinal points of the, how would anybody know that the structure below in a sandy desert on the banks of the Nile is going to be strong enough as a foundation to, when they build the building, it won't subside after centuries or even a couple of decades? I think we'll just stop right there. I don't need to know another proportion or King's Chamber and what happens and reincarnation and, I don't need to know anything else. I'm looking just right back to the root of the concept. And when you do the same thing with devolution, it has a lot of currency, which is why a Steiner and an Evola and a Tillack and de Olivet, these kinds of men were preoccupied. These were not dumbasses. These were some of the highest intelligences in the world, right? We've already spoken about that. In fact, even today, some of the people who are now dealing with the alternative science, alternative math, alternative concepts of consciousness are all way smarter and more degreed, right, than the naysayers. And that's almost 9 times out of 10, if not 10 times out of 10, right? Doesn't mean they're always right. That's not what the science is saying. But it's just a fact that you can go and check. Ian McGilchrist and these credentials of these people, Michael Gazzaniga, right? And some of them are semi-materialists. Some of them, they've gone all the way out of materialism. That's a really, really good sign. So when you dig down into devolution, you find something interesting, and it's not just Michael Cremo's sort of Hindu-based take that leads us in. And we did the interview, right? That leads us in to the subject, in case you'd never heard about it before. But if you dig in then to Chinese mythology, Alaskan mythology, the Bach Saga, unpack that about as much as you can do, and they believe it. They believe in expanses of millions of years in which ancestors were godlike, and then you get us. Right? So it's not just limited to some Hindu theory, right? But the main thing is that the ones who've looked into it, like a Michael Cremo, have basically taken it as far as it's now going to go, right? Without some more actual maybe evidence or some, extraordinary person coming along. In his book, Human Devolution, which I recommend, it's taken about as far as it's going to go, without a major new revolution, right? Or, revelation, so to speak. So it's a little bit on hiatus, right? And we're still left with what the shaman have to say, what this and that tradition has to say. And so my little article there was to give a teaser, put in some ancient prophecies, very intriguing. They've been intriguing to me since I was a teenager. and in general, and it's all there, right? A lot of very interesting things and finds, not just in consciousness, but in artifacts. And so it's a short article. People can read it. It's got the basic facts there and the recommendations. So, that's where we left it. But the thing is that it's hard for people to get into, if they're entrained with the theory of evolution. So it's not that this theory of devolution is that difficult to really take on board or too lengthy. It's not. It's that we have been entrained into thinking in terms of evolution, which is just usually that higher forms, higher structures, more complex structures arise out of simpler structures, right? And although we've got your holographic theories and fractal theories and Gaia theories and chaos theories, the general public haven't bothered their ass with any of that, right? And even most teachers and specialists haven't. It's just like, no, it's simple to understand. Things evolve out of, simpler systems. And what microcremo has shown is that's not true. Even if you go back to abiogenesis, the early forms of life on the micro level, they're immensely complex. They're equally complex, if not more complex than, systems that are meant to have come out of them later on. And so that's what, I'll put the link below to Michael's interview, and people can follow those links up as well, because it's not completely nailed down. It's just that people can't think of the reverse. Half the audience, we would ever talk to hasn't thought of the reverse or thought very deeply about it. And yet, if you look at today, because again, this podcast is not about some meandering, wild theory. This has the most extraordinary meaning for what we're seeing today, because when you look at today's life closely, all these paradigms, sociologically, educationally, economically, whatever you want to look at, there is signs of devolution. There's signs of fucking stasis, which is even probably worse. But, well, stasis at least can be a healthy thing in which, just like you when you're doing sports. You need a moment of rest. Well, okay, so that might not be as bad. But are we actually now seeing the first signs of actually devolution? There's what they're calling the reset at any given time is going back to the rudiments that you already should know. Is that what you call a reset? Is that what you call healthy? It wasn't what I called healthy. It's not a gazing back from a vista and a mountain looking back and go, let's assess where we've come from. That's perfectly permissible. No, I'm talking about, you're at 99 point of the game of the ladder, snakes, and suddenly we find ourselves at 1 and call that healthy? Because all the wisdom has been trashed, and we have to come back and go, so what is it with education of children? Or if we isolate, children, there might be, there might be a pathological fall. Could you explain that? And all the rest of it, right? Yeah. Anarchanism and whatever, right? We're back to square one. That's not what I call progress. That's what I definitely call devolution on steroids.
Well, and I guess this was a question we were talking a little bit off air, was the way I think people look at it is either, they come from that Darwinian scientific perspective that the humanity is on this evolutionary spiral, and we've taken a few steps back, but we got technology, we got airplanes, we got computers, we got all this stuff. So people would say we see signs of evolution because we're evolving in certain ways. But what we hear from many of these voices that you're bringing up, these people, and even in the article, is the idea that we aren't really evolving spiritually or psychologically, therefore we're devolving, and therefore we could have all the fancy, shiny toys and technological advancements in the universe, and it still wouldn't do anything because it's in the hands of a devolving species. And that might sound kind of pessimistic to people, and for me, I would say, when you look at it, we have these two forces. We have that resistance within each and every one of us to take responsibility, to work on our own personal spiritual evolution. But then there's those of us that do. And so that's, I guess, what gives us hope that it's not necessarily the entire human race that's devolved. We have these bright shining lights, these brilliant geniuses that have brought this amazing work to the world, that did all of that inner work, right? And you think about it, like we do, even though the art and the music is crap right now in the main pop culture, we do have artistic musicians and geniuses in that field as well. In every field you'll see it, but they're few, and it's always seemed to have been few. And if we were to see evolution, we would hope we would see more geniuses and more expansion and more of this, understanding, but we're seeing less. So then you go, okay, is there a hidden hand that has influenced events historically to keep humanity like grazing sheep that are easily managed, to sort of cut us off? There's even the idea going into genetic manipulation that certain light switches were turned on for certain, for worker ant faculties, but then certain light switches were turned off. So it's as if we've got access to this unlimited potential, but we can't cross that Rubicon unless we do this tremendous work of overhauling our entire mindset, everything we've given to us from the culture and history and even genetic trauma, as we've talked about. All of these points come into this discussion of, is the human race and every human being living on it devolving, or is consciousness devolving because of various factors, and is it different for some and not others? And it just starts to get a little bit more nuanced. So it's such an important discussion. That's just kind of my first thoughts on it, though, is that we've got all these forces that have contributed to the fall. Yeah.
And don't forget that one of the reasons we couldn't even begin to prove the devolution is because it's a process that doesn't happen in one life ontogenetically. It's a phylogenetic process of extreme gradual movement. And therefore, that already makes it difficult. It makes it even difficult for experts who may be locked into one field, would love to study it, but it requires them to know statistics, or, it would take them into fields that maybe it would take a lifetime. You'd have to know about geology because that ties in. We're just keeping it real simple. And another way of framing this question along your lines is that, look, if we are entrained all to believe, and I mean, from school, you're entrained because your parents believed it, so it's not a matter of conscious discussion where they sit you down and go, son, here's what we believe, and there's this whole thing about you not having to believe what we believe, and so we want you to cultivate the mentality of not believing what your parents believe because we're telling you to do it.
Right.
Now, lesson one. Right, so it's not a conscious thing. And you're entrained. In fact, the parents wouldn't even be saying that even if they could. They're going, you fucking believe as we bloody tell you, right? So look, there you are. That's entrainment, explaining the fancy word. The fact is then that you're entrained to believe that not only did we come from more primitive structures, and the science proves that that's not true, but you also believe that almost every step of the evolution that you're speaking about was done for the name of survival. So if you have that in your head, and you're not able to think that, well, elephants, whales, animals, and eagles and all survive without cultivating any kind of sophisticated, nothing like it. Nothing even like it. Look at the complexity of bardic poetry. 5,000 years BC, and there are such verses. Haiku. I don't see a primate ever wanting to do that, right? So obviously, what has that got to do with survival? But if you've been locked into that everything that you do, the dexterity of the hand, for instance, that can play exceptional music. That's survival, sure. I've already told you. That's to put food in your belly. All right, our rapport with nature, aesthetics, the sublime, right? The idea of an ear for art, a nose for food, all of our sensual gratification when we're touching the things of the world, right? The velvets, the textures, all of that. That's all survival. Any idiot can see it's not, right? Any idiot. And the thing is that now, as I said, the top echelon people are also conceding this hand over fist, right? So that these paradigms are sort of falling away. It doesn't mean that there's not elements of survival there, because, if you weren't able to survive, then you couldn't enjoy any other, accessories to survival. But that doesn't reduce everything to survival. And so devolution theory is coming in to say, look, if all of those things that you call survival were a state of man being locked out, so the man a million years BC, right, Racco Welsh and whatever, and hunting dinosaurs with his spears and all, right, if that was not man as he began, but man as he was after a tremendous catastrophe, that's why your paradigm of survival comes into it. But that therefore does not mean that if you go back to prehistory when man was civil, high civilizations like what Plato and others talk about, that the question of survival ever entered into it. So that's where you break that paradigm. Again, it's like I do in all my things, bring in the prehistory, and you'll find that a lot of these paradigms fizzle very quickly, whereas throwing rocks at them from another vantage, they're too armored. When you bring in the high civilization theory, then the question of survival, it becomes moot. And only stands, now that you've recontextualized it, because man is not what he was. Right? He became primitive. Those skin-wearing cave crawlers, right, were in that situation, desperate to survive. Once you start civilization at that point, well, we know how many theorists, the Lawrence Gardners, whoever else, Michael Cremos, who just devastated that. You're not going to be able to tell me that you can find 25 million old weaved garments inside a piece of amber that old and explain and then keep your paradigms and all the other stuff that a Michael Cremo or whoever has brought to the table. It's all over, mate. right? You can't. And I've known that since the beginning, since before writing the Atlantis book and way, way back. You only have to live in Ireland and have your eyes open and you'll know it's all nonsense. Astronomically aligned monuments and high mathematical precision and all of that, right? And a complex poetry, a complex iconography, a complex cosmology. It just doesn't appear out of primitive societies. So that whole theory that it was survival, yes, I'm not against that, but it's only within a certain context. And the average person who believes that hook, line, and sinker probably hasn't read Plato, hasn't given a shit about Atlantis, doesn't, read mythology like I do. And so what are you going to do? What kind of conversation are you going to have with that person? There's no conversation at all. Because they've not conceived of any other alternative, right? And they're conceiving of an alternative, as we see around us today, shakes their world. So that's why we're partly primitive. Whether or not that's a sign of the devolution, I've addressed that in the article, and I say, yes, it is. It's not that we're dealing with shivering primitives in fear of animals and fear of forests and thunder. We're dealing with a modern person drenched in 10 times the fear of paradigm busting. But the person who has that syndrome, catch-22, can't see that. So it's worse. The person who's in the syndrome I just described is incapable of the self-objective thought. So is that a sign of devolution? You see how suddenly interesting it becomes? You make a move on the board, I make a move. And instead of weakening the theory of devolution, it's fucking strengthening it. Because as you rightly said, if there was evolution, wouldn't we have an open mind by now in the 21st century? We have anything but. Every time I turn over, there's something else that is so utterly infantile and sophomore and pathetic that they're talking about, like immunity, or if I sneeze into a tissue and then hold that tissue on my face all day, I'm going to get healthy, David. Keep doing it then. Here's a couple of more snot rags you can shove up your nose. Yes, but that's Bill Gates has told me. I'm into health. I'm into suppressing you. Yeah, well, you are Christian, right? Yes. Well, what is the meaning of the word spirit? They all heal. You agree that the Holy Spirit cures and, every... Of course it does. It's the Great Spirit. Yeah, well, it's etymologically, correspondent, right, with the word spiritus, which is to breathe. Are we making any headway here? Inspiration is aspiration, is breathing. The heal all is breathing. You've got every Thursday, wherever country you're in, you've got the garbage cans lining the streets. The most toxic thing in your house, right, is lining the streets openly. The kids are now back in school. Every parent knows that if you're going to get a disease in your house, it's probably going to be from Joey coming back, sodden with disease from all the other muckers at the school, right? So the official known paradigms of how disease comes into your life, etc., right, are untouched. And yet we're still, we're having to be retaught these basics. So again, forget devolution. There's a cognitive dissonance or reality distortion method, techniques. Are those being taught? So it's not that devolution is going to be an explain all. It's just one way of coming at something that says, what is it about human beings that get so far with a certain wisdom, right? Small caps. And then what the fuck? They're reversing in every conceivable way. I thought we had made progress in this movement, right? Whether it was with 9/11 or the case for this or the case for that or the case for the media and the case for disclosure. Well, it all seems to have just washed away, right? And we're back to, the basics again, having to explain those. And to me, that's a tragic, absolutely tragic.
It is. I mean, I guess the thing, maybe part of me sees too, though, that a lot of people are catching on to this. I mean, we have more subscribers here on Unslaved than ever before, which means people are serious because, we don't just put this all out there in public. We have this as an exclusive project, so people, all the other platforms, people trying to talk about this are blowing up. People like Michael Cremo are selling more books than ever. There seems to be a big shift, at least at present, because of the threat. So at least we know humanity moves on the basis of, oh my God, I have a threat against me, therefore I'm motivated to try to grow and learn something. Maybe that's what it takes, right? But the big thing that we've talked about a lot on this podcast is trauma and fear and how it's used and how it takes a strong person with courage to evolve thinking, right? And if we think about it even in the evolutionary terms, it's like one life form, grows and goes through stress and struggle in its environment, and then adapts to the environment, and then grows stronger, and then, when you're working out your body to make it stronger, you have to keep putting it through stress, and that takes work, and it's as if that's what's been kicked out of us. So now, because that's been totally taken away and everything's easy and quick and fast, and you don't really have to work as much in that sense anymore, and you have all these escape mechanisms provided to you, it's an easy choice for people to devolve. And I feel like, do you think that in the question of devolution, this does bring in the volitional nature of consciousness into the question as to whether or not are we on a predetermined path of devolution, or is there will involved?
Yeah, good. It all dovetails, doesn't it? Let me touch on one thing before that. Both the theories of devolution and evolution are weakened by something nobody ever brings up, and that is, what is the end game? You mentioned training. If I train and train and train and train, and I get up to a very, very high level, and I'm just about at the level of the 100, square, I'm a master. And then, like what happened to Bruce Lee, you get a slip disc, or any number of, or even the training itself disabled you. I can't, whatever, just take it like that. You get blinded, or you break your back or something. What the fuck is evolutionary about that? So what it means is that you thought that you were evolving, but as a matter of fact, it set you back worse than you were before you went to the first belt. What I mean by that is that you can't prove devolution or evolution until you actually come to the end game point, if there is such a thing, right? But let's just think in the terms of, say, a Teilhard de Chardin, an omega point, somewhat like Hegel, the end of history, right? Until you get to that finality, that station, because remember, what is evolution, what is devolution? They're processes. That means they cannot be assessed by any one moment of that process, because then you're not looking at process. You've immediately blinded yourself to an instance, right? Now, so then what you'd have to do in order to prove the validity of either one of those things, and including evolution, is wait for the absolute end game and then surveil what happened, where are we at, and any kind of detours that might have been prior to that. Only when you've come to the end of the line can you say, well, did you have a good trip? And you go, it was rubbish, right? First class was like third class. The toilets were just awful, and the food, right? You see, you couldn't really assess, so we're already presuming when we talk about evolution and devolution, as if we're like all knowing about it. I don't give a fuck what you got in the wall. I don't care what PhD you jumped through. The game is not up. The Vedics are even telling you it's a cycle, so it can never come to an end. Other people are talking about a linear concept of time. You see, so it's not just so easy. But just remember this thing, because it applies to the new theory of the universe. It's expanding. What into? And when will it stop? Silence. Right. So then your first term doesn't mean anything. I would only know if it was expanding if I really was at the end of the game of expansion, and I could judge whether it was temporary, whether it was provisional, how did it expand, in what ways. You can't say a general thing. So evolution falls when you may think that you're seeing something when you focus down here, right? That's called monodeism, right? Or monoidism. We've talked about this before. It's just a narrowing of the human focus. And then you take a snapshot of what you've seen and go, that's reality. This is the way the left brain works, right? The right brain says, wait till the end. They go, but that takes millions of years. Well, that takes millions of years then. I shall not comment before, because I have no idea whether we're going to get over the next hump and it's back again, right? That what we thought was evolution was devolution. What devolution was, evolution. It's like that jar of time, the hourglass. Yeah, it looks like, oh, the top is all empty now. The last grains of sand have fallen into the bottom. Woe is me. And somebody just turns it upside down. It starts again. Right? So, yeah. So the paradigms are always going to bust our minds. Right, that's the thing to realize first off. But coming back to your story about the determinism, see, determinism as a philosophy and a paradigm, relativism as a paradigm, and materialism, right? All three of those can be busted in minutes if you know what you're doing. In fact, they can be busted in 1 minute. I've maintained that each of those, right, if you have a proper understanding of them, study them well enough, that in one sentence, less than 1 minute, you can totally devastate all three of those. And I've done it in other work. In relativism, you can do it by just simply saying that relativism, is false, because the basis of all, life and consciousness is thought. That's it, busted. Because you have to be a thinker, right, to even be able to conceive of relativism as a principle. So underneath it is thought, and that's not the same thing. It's not the same thing as thinking. Thinking does lead us into error. So, but that's the kind of thinking that then becomes us plagued by, detoured by things like society, consensus. But I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about that we have thought, right? That we have the basal principle of thought, not its various, contaminated versions as we move towards subjecthood in, say, a culture, which is devastating to one's thought, right? No, just the very principle of the thinking that gets a person to say, well, I believe in relativism. Well, you couldn't do because thought is an absolute, dickhead, right? And it's the same with determinism. Remember that book, End of Determinism, where the guy says, for a determinist even to form the theory of determinism means that there must be its opposite, free will.
Right.
I mean, it really, you see, with the chicanery, in academia is, people listening to us right now know that the theory behind vaccination, the theory behind immunity, the theory behind germ theory is bollocks with a big fat PhD after. We know this, right? There's hardly a paradigm online, right? Take a website hosting, a feature of anything online that a 9-year-old couldn't do better than YouTube guys and Google are doing. And I mean on a scientific level. They fucked up all the things that used to be quite user-friendly in the true sense. You know why? Because they had proper CEOs and clever technicians. They've all long gone to Hawaii, right? And the punks that they've hired for $5 an hour have taken over, and then just to shuffle papers and fill that seat. They go, I think I'm going to change something just so that their 3 years there can look like they've done something. And it's always crap.
Yeah.
From anything, their carts, their customer service, their visuals, the skins, it's shit. And then you can prove it because you just go back to the way it was originally. Go, that's fucking really user friendly. That's, yeah, great. It's so smooth and everything. So there's devolution right there. Although I must say, until you finally come to the end of a process, you can never know anything really truly about that process as it actually is. And since that's impossible, then you only have theory.
Yeah, that's right. And that's a really good observation, because I think people in the scientific community, they're trying to get the next grant and the next, and then people are trying to move up in their position. So they have their own agenda. And that's part of our natural inclination to want to evolve our lives. So, I mean, in my sense, I want to evolve my life. I want to get smarter. I want to learn more. I want to make I want to finally get these user-friendly technologies to be user-friendly. There are people who have a desire to improve things, right? And we've spoken about how, the idea of man as the improver, right? As the creator, as opposed to just the destructor and the destroyer. And so we have these polar forces in the world. We have people that are seeking honestly to improve themselves, and I work with them all the time, people that come in and they go, I don't know why my life is shit. I don't know why I'm depressed and sad at night. I don't know why I'm addicted to all this other stuff, but I know enough to know I got to improve myself. I got to do something. And so they come in kind of empty slate, and then they want to improve themselves. And if they take the steps, you can say, hey, that's the sign of a human being seeing that they're living in shit and wanting to make it better. Is that a sign of evolution in that person's life? Is this a collective thing, that humanity collectively has to be the thing evolving? Or can it always be that it's only going to be little glimmers of light that slowly, as you say, may take millions of years to bring us somewhere, right? And maybe we just have to be fine with that we look back in history and we go, hey, we saw a Giordano Bruno, but the vast majority of people were burning people alive in oil and running around crazy and believing in all this mumbo jumbo. But then we had a little glimmer of light over here, and you go, okay, that's how it's always got to be. And even when we have the internet today, where we can communicate around the world instantaneously, okay, in that sense, maybe we're evolving certain things, we're evolving dialogue or whatever, and some people can say they're evolving their ideas, but in other senses, no, it's being used as a tool to surveil and suppress, freedom and all that. So you go, okay. So I guess what I'm saying is this a collective idea? Is it really, if we think of the individual versus the one versus the many, right? Is evolution in the hands of the collective of humanity, or is evolution something that can only and always be something that starts within an individual through the force of will?
Yeah, see, this is the problem, right? If, say you took that image, that metaphor of Giordano Bruno, or anyone like that who served the world, right? In opening their eyes, he was a great scientist. You can't believe it. And then he converts to fucking Islam. And that journey in his personal life is completely auto-bankrupt, right? He's just killed his mind. This happens every day. Because now when he goes to work or talks to the neighbors or writes a piece that goes out publicly, it's full of that shit, right? That's not evolution. Yet he might have in his, younger days when his mind was more free, really have done something brilliant, not only publicly, but maybe, in the community. So again, it's all about, in one way, suspending judgment on those bigger ideas until you saw the end of the result, the end, but we're not around to see that. So then you start saying, then that's a deficiency. If none of us have the historical scope, right, then of course we will have to suspend judgment. But the Ayn Rands and Brandons are telling you, never do that. Always judge, always be highly critical. Like you're saying, we have to ramp that up. So where does twain meet, right? And so this then becomes a problem. And I think a lot of people are divided along those lines. And we're divided along those lines mostly because society doesn't even teach us the historical perspective anyway. So it starts right there. Because before we can even decide for ourselves which of those two we want to feels right to us, the education has already made it that made the decision for you. That you're not going to be given a historical perspective, like looking out ahead, which is fantastic, and then looking back clearly. They've so distorted the picture of history, and they've so narrowed your vision about a future, just about your own success and your own attainment, in some sort of Faustian sense, that our vision is impaired. And so so it is collective to that degree. And therefore, stepping out of it, I said in the article, maybe if it wasn't that one, it's this latest one I did, called In Words We Trust. And that is, we are not inclined to say, I don't want to do as you do, I want to do as I do, right? And what I try to make a point in that article is that in order, just like a child nestles up to the warmth of the mother's breast, and rats will get together in a big mountain, and the one at the bottom, he's the happiest rat on the pile because he's warm and comforted and protected, right? He's got a huge smile on his face. Right. So we do the same thing by hooking on to the words of others. I apologize for jumping ahead to another article, but it's fresh in my mind. So at the very least, we want that security. We want that body heat. So we latch on to what a person says, allowing a certain amount of soothsayers, right, with hidden agendas to make full use of this, because it's not that it's a bad thing, right? It's what's called social communication. What would we be if we didn't have that? But if the motive for it is to maintain an arrested sense of your own development, then it's bad. Whereas if it is a connectivity that is for mercurial purposes, to get a sense of okayness through an empathic, right, connectivity, but it's an empathic one that then has within it the elements of discrimination. See, when there's two kinds of people, right? One will hook on just for the raw heat, with no sense of true empathy, just a sense of, he just wants a sense of belonging, and it can belong to the Chinese marching in lockstep over China. He's perfectly happy, right? Or so there's some Bolshevik nonsense, right? Or some voodoo thing, right? I mean, it just doesn't matter. He just wants the comfort of the cave, and so he can hear the voices of others and hear their movement. The empathic, though, that's not real empathy, right? That's something else. So they bring this out in movies like Zardoz, for instance, right, where they have a bunch of people called the apathetics, and that's what they're into. Now, in another context, empathy has to have it within it the seeds of discrimination, so that the only people then I will empathize with are those who share my values, which is what Ayn Rand's work is really all about, not all that slander that she's attacked for. This is what she's really about. I must bond and find empathy only with those people who share my values, which now becomes a philosophical enterprise, doesn't it? Because you have to have some fucking values. So my empathy now is a very different, phenomena than the one we've just described. And the benefit of it is when you empathize with people who play better guitar than you, who are far more evolved than you, and that you see that they have some of the same values that you do, is that you will automatically evolve. And the collective now pulls you with it. Using the word collective with a small c. That group to whom you belong now, right, is pulling you with it. So you get over a lot of humps and you get over a lot of things that you might not on your own be able to get over, right? Whereas with the other kind of situation, which is just a cluster, you're not evolving and neither are they. And then you get okay with that. And so any movement beneath your feet, right, of the the mythic level, or even a change from the outside world is considered immensely threatening. See how, again, it matters to what we're going through now? The shake-ups that we're having now has irritated a group of people, the left, we call them, right? It's not just them, it's irritating, by the way. But it's irritating them because they lived a lie from the start. As I said, the catch-22 means that they're impervious from understanding that. So no matter how many books are written even by liberals and leftists, and I can name them, there's plenty out there. There's even books coming out now by immigrants who are pointing out the critical mass and saying enough is enough is enough. You're hurting us. You're hurting the hardworking previous immigrants, you bloody bastards. So, but the left, who are running wild right now, can't hear that. So now we're dealing with cognitive dissonance. Then when you ask them for an explanation, it's monotheism. But you will listen to that explanation if you didn't know. If you know it's just a narrow nonsense that they've had to concoct because now a rational person has come to talk to them, you won't be so interested in their answer because it's shit, right? But they don't know that, right? They don't know that. And so the whole thing is that collective has never moved, and it hasn't moved for hundreds of years. Remember, Marx was wrong. All the other types that branched off from him, the left Hegelians were wrong. The Marcuses were wrong, right? The whole platform is wrong. So they've got nothing but wrong ability to deal with. And so the little bits of logic that come in, the little bit of proofs, that you might take from a Rand or a Gustave Le Bon to show the lunacy of crowd consciousness, that's hateful to them. And so they have taken to burning you down, finding out where you live, and coming and screaming in your ear and drinking your beer and whatever it might be, to get in your face about it. So that's where we are right now. And one has to then diagnose, as we've been doing on multiple programs here, and not just from one perspective, what we're talking about now is another perspective, of why they're irritated. Well, they're irritated because of a total fallacy. And it ties into devolution and theories like that, because if the whole human race has done that on some sort of level, if all of us are in this kind of reality distorted realm, then just like I've said from day fucking one in my work, nature doesn't hold with injustice. It doesn't hold with evil. And all things that are unsustainable will fall. It's Koyanatskatsi is what the Hopi Indians called it. That you just leave it the fuck alone and it's crumbling. It's going to come apart in your hands, right? And they claim that they have even epochal, right, renderings of this, as sort of Plato, sort of toyed with, right? Didn't really go into any depth. But the idea, at least there, of the evolution was there. That it is cyclical. If you live a lie, which they call Maya in Vedic, that Maya will blind you to such an extent that a weird flip, right, called an enantiodromia comes about, in which the thing that is false brings about its opposite, right? There's a swing effect. Carl Jung believed it and even talked about it being a central principle to consciousness. In other words, if you're too rational as a person, you're too much of a thinking type, a point will come in your life which people like him look for. Actually, astrologers also look for these kind of flip-over moments. Very, very important. But a flip-over moment comes where you have an experience that knocks you so hard for 6 that actually you flip in your mind and become an emotional type, possibly for a while, but sometimes for a lot longer. And vice versa, a gooey, smothering, emotional person who's come from that, position their whole fucking life. And it just becomes an obscenity. Something within their own consciousness mind. This is even more of an extraordinary dynamic, because the change, the catalyst, is within, which shows you that there must be something, of a subliminal level or subconscious level that doesn't like what happens in the upper structure. Right? We can't explore that right now. But this underlying restlessness, this underlying discontent with the way you are, causes a physical event to happen, like the wife taken off or whatever it might be, some trauma at work or whatever. And the person goes through a main catharsis. If you watch the film, what is the name of that film? With Robin Williams. It was made by Terry Gilliam. It'll come to me in a minute. And movie. Oh, in fact, even if you watch the movie Fearless with Jeff Bridges, right? You'll see this. It's actually quite a theme in many, many films, that a person, is one way because that's what's got them success, that's what made them happy, etc. And then all of a sudden, a thing happens in their life, like a tragedy, and there's a complete flip over, right? And we don't have to watch movies about this. This happens in our own lives. So there are underlying processes that contradict evil and contradict ignorance and contradict any kind of escape into cognitive dissonance. And so how this ties truly into devolution is that devolution is just a fancy word for fall, as you might, get it in a mystical or religious context. Although we're always speaking broader than what they paint it as, right? But in the end of the day, it comes up to a fall. Was that a fall from nature and nature's ways? Was it a fall from a spiritual sort of perfection, right? Was it the golden age of the gods, right, that we fell from? Well, if it is a case, then we are already in a state of fall, and therefore all are thinking, except for that few that you spoke of, who for some bizarre reason have had experiences that have saved them from that consensus. The rest of mankind is going through the Armageddon, going to go through that period of Koyaanisqatsi, where the false itself crumbles in of itself. And there's a law of implosion. And then you have to so where free will comes into this is that you then, not being part of that or seeing it coming, right, in a prophetic way, can then say, I choose to go along and help people, or I'm sitting the fuck back. Because I have to let them go through it. Because if I run to save them, they'll repeat the same thing again tomorrow.
Right.
Because they haven't really supped off the consequences of their own delusion. So I'm leaving people to their addictions. I'm leaving them to their delusions. Because only in that, remember we said there's already an internal principle, call it archetypal or whatever. There's already a surveilling modality within, call it the self, that is going to do what needs to be done. And you getting in there with a white coat, it ends up just in being like some Monty Python slaughter scene. It's not going to happen, right? You think you're doing well, but it's a nightmare, right? It's just chaos. It's an Alice in Wonderland's kitchen. And so, don't you see that now? If you move that to today's context, although you can apply this to any period, if you apply it to today's context, it has immense relevance. Whether you should, get in there and start, doing what you can. I prefer to do a bit of both, right? But at the end of the day, each person has to make the decision. Really do something to change the zeitgeist, or do I sit back and observe it and allow people to go through the cathartic experience? Might that not show my deeper belief in unseen hands? And might not my running in to fix it in a histrionic way, a madcap way, actually send a message to the universe that I'm a fucking idiot and that I'm not trusting in something that is ultimately going to do the work for me? What is it about my hubris or my, egoism, or just my lack of understanding that sends me off in that direction? So, but nobody can make that decision for you, and never should they. You must make it for yourself in the silence of your own being, whether you want to do one or the other, or maybe a little bit of both. And I'm in the middle of making that decision, right? And so is a lot of other people.
Yeah, it's so important, this chat, because as you're talking, I'm thinking about maybe areas in my life where I feel I've devolved and other areas where I feel I've evolved. And of course, this is my own self-analysis, so you can only be so objective. But the idea here is like, okay, so if I use my journey as a martial artist, going from white belt to black belt, just as a metaphor for this idea of evolution, there were many times I didn't just have this straight upward curve. If there was a chart and a graph on the wall, I didn't have this continual upswing towards the level of achievement of a black belt, right? Because all the things that it takes to refine yourself, to strengthen yourself, to learn about yourself, the gazillion mistakes you got to make. It's not just slow upward trend. What it is it's like it's a hilly valley and then a upward to the mountain and then down to the bottom of the pits and then up and down. It'd be a curvy, chaotic thing, because there's times when you get a lot of momentum. You're operating in the right mode, you're disciplined, things are working well, so you see more evolution, you're training more, so you're getting more information. And then other times you kind of fall off the wagon and you're going out and you're kind of letting things loose a little bit and you're not quite as disciplined, and then you start going down, and then when you go back to class, those guys that were training hard are kicking your ass and reminding you, hey, you kind of you slipped. And so you come back in and you auto-correct and then you build yourself back. And it's funny how oftentimes I used to beat myself up about those times where you have the valleys. And then I started to just accept it and love that part of myself and realize, nope, that's because I maybe have been working too hard towards evolving. And maybe there's a space to just kind of go back within, let it sit with you, let it motivate you again, right? And then when it comes back, I found that the next upward trend was bigger. So what I'm trying to get at here is sometimes it can be viewed that evolution, in order to evolve, the devolution process is essential. and it actually helps to catapult a bigger leap to the next level of evolution. And if we applied that to humanity and time and all that, maybe that's one way to look at it too, is it operates like a wave, and it's like we have to crash and burn, like the vast majority of humanity has to crash and burn. You got those few bright lights that are always escape to the mountains. They're like, holy shit, what's this, right? And then the next time you get a little bit more and a little bit more, and maybe that's what it takes that time, because otherwise it's a violation of will. Otherwise we are in a determined universe, right? So I don't know. Does that make any sense in terms of just that idea of the peaks and valleys, and maybe devolution is part of evolution?
Oh yeah, we just make it easy by talking about straight lines and all of this nonsense, right? A sense, and we get that from the Christian world. Your Pilgrim's Progress idea and all of that. Of course, it's not that way. Often it's one step forward, 10 steps back. That's just the way it has to be. And it all comes back to our level of education and parenting as well, right? But don't forget, velocity is involved, quality over quantity is involved, need, desire, and there's also a period where hiatus and stasis is absolutely valuable as well, right? There's positives of that as well, right, in the whole process. Because remember how many times I've said, people who've really followed me from the start know how much effort I've put into talking about recapitulation, right? That all learning is really relearning. And I actually believe not just the Crowleyan idea of holding the opposite, beliefs or whatever, opinions and ideas that you hold and cherish. But I also believe that go back over what you think you already know. The forensic people have to do it. What the hell? A detective has to do it. And it's extremely valuable, because if anything is worth the time, if anything merits the term gnosis, well, then it's not just disclosed in one go, right? It's gonna be revealing over and over again. And then it's not so much as a linear process of any kind, because remember, there are philosophers who've totally deconstructed process of all kinds, everything we've just said in the last hour. There's philosophers like Heidegger who don't necessarily believe in process and talk about that being somewhat of an illusion. And then the deconstructive philosophers like that will then show you, they'll back that up. And that's an interesting theory too, right? That even the idea of process is part of the cognitive dissonance, part of the reality distortion, part of the delusion. And it's more a case of sparks, like what you're talking about. There's philosophers that totally believe that instead of one guy explained it more like, stones in a pool that create all of these different intersectioning and interlocking ripples. That's life. And some of them fade away and some of them come up, really strongly. It's not about any linearity. We create that linearity for the reasons that they talk about, which is, it comes as a standard with subjectivity. If people read my Schopenhauer's Error article, touch on this a little bit, the difference between selfhood and subjectivity. Subjectivity being the person you think you are, courtesy of that world out there, that society out there. They are the ones who build the straight lines. And they're the ones who make you, just in this sort of Pink Floyd the wall way, make you be the disciple of horizon, and then you start making straight lines until everybody's got a straight line. And yet there's no straight lines in nature. So hello, how about that, right? But without getting into those philosopher guys, you just look at it and say, there's ebbs and flows in my own life. And therefore, I've changed my perspective, right? It's not just about straight lines between here and there. It's about the road I'm traveling here and now. It all comes up in card 7 in the Tarot with a Chariot. He's really fucked by that. In fact, his horses won't even, whatever's pulling his cart aren't even facing any real. All he can see is that point on the horizon, and he can't even get off because the wheels are this way. The sphinxes are that way, or the horses are pulling in opposite directions. That's that card telling you all about this, right? And that can be broken down in so many ways. So obviously there's the active, the way I broke it down in that series is that, look, it's two ways, right? There's the Emperor, Martian, Solar, Jupiterian need to pick the thing up and run like hell to get to the finishing line. And that's a very valid part of being human, right? That's your Nuth, Crowley would call it. Then there's the Hadith, which is the thing in the middle. Because the thing that you pick up and run with as a toy, like a child would play with a toy and go, this is brilliant, right? Daddy, take off the stabilizers. I can do it on 2 wheels now. The rushing, right, of the wind through your hair is a legitimate, it can't be knocked, it's a legitimate way of comportment toward reality. But then there's this other side, which he called Hadith, using these obscure Egyptian terms, which is the center point. And we had, what's his name, Akorshawn sort of giving his own take on this. What do I actually know about the thing I picked up? I know only one property of it, the one that enervates me, right? The one that, gets me to go in overdrive. Let's just get up to fourth gear. But what do I know about gear mechanisms? Right? Fuck all, right? So the hadith goes within the thing introvertedly, right? Like we have to go inside ourselves. And there's a pathological and a healthy way of going within. Just all introverts are not spiritual people. How could they be? Just because you're scared of the world and scared of blending in with the creatures at school and getting your name called and you never get enough approval and then I'm just an introvert, and then later on you learn to call that spiritual. I'm an introvert. I don't have anything to do with the world. You think I'm going to fall for that? You're introverted because you hate the world, you fear the world, and you've used a natural capacity, which is to turn within, to orient within, and you do that, and you do it permanently and became your lifestyle. But if I get you down on a bench and give you some psychology, it'll turn out you're bloody your closet fucking extrovert who got turned in internally, and vice versa, right? So that doesn't mean that then introvert is anything spiritual. The extrovert man could be just as spiritual, if not more than you. So it just doesn't finish there, you see. So the study goes on. And that doesn't mean that, like I just said, an extrovert person who may look to you like quite busy and quite extrovert and superficial may in fact be a very spiritual man. But the point is that there's two forms of expression that we are here to balance. We are, like walking on a tightrope between this extrovert, mastery of the extrovert world and correct orientation, rational orientation towards an external reality, so it's teaching us the lessons we need to learn, and a healthy internalization that isn't neurotic. And if you really grasp what I'm saying, now you can start diagnosing all the people you run into. With help of Ayn Rand, Nathaniel Brand, there's lots of modalities you can use. But this is a good one, a good rule of thumb, to say that just because somebody's extrovert and looks all holy and charitable and everything, they could be totally neurotic. Let me test for that. Do I know how to? And this extrovert clown that I think is running around, might he not also then be a good model for me to say, there's aspects of that person, right? So it's an ebb and flow, right? It's an ebb and flow, and nobody masters it until, not even to the end, but at least it's because it's not really something you master. It's a constant dialectic, right? That is endemic to consciousness itself, right? If it wasn't, then we wouldn't have a right and left brain. We wouldn't even talk about things like masculine and feminine. This thing is, it's ontological, right? And so when we ride along with it, you start to get a different kind of understanding of how life works, right? Knowing the thing from inside as it is in itself requires a certain perspective, an egoless, less ego-based, one, because you're not just plugging it in so it enervates you and you can fly, right? You may do that all your life and not know the thing at all, right? Or person at all, right? So there's a type of empathic connectivity with the thing as it is in itself, despite your ego need of it, right? This is what is the basis of a lot of Martin Heidegger's theory. What do you really know about the door handle that you turn every day? Have you ever even fucking noticed it? And the answer is, no, you haven't. Have you ever even noticed the page that you write your stuff on? No, you haven't. Or the pen that you're holding? No, you haven't. Have you noticed the temperature of your body at any given point of the day? No. What about the internal, organs and how they're feeling? Right? What about the surface of your skin? And all of these things that we're completely unconscious of. So then, it takes, now you have to deal with an awareness of a different kind. And also the idea of don't beat yourself up for not being aware, because maybe that kind of awareness is not something that we're meant to have. So this is where a lot of people who try to describe this go wrong. They want you to expand your awareness. Instead of asking the question, I have as much awareness as I'm meant to have. And if I try to expand it inside the cage in which I'm caught, I'm thinking here of Mitwelt or the society, I might go mad. I'm abbreviating, but this is the basic gist of it. Maybe the kind of consciousness and awareness I have is just right. It's the right setting. And if I come in there with a bicycle pump and try to jack it up, right, and pump more energy into it, I could be causing untold damage to myself. So there's bigger, it's not just so new agey. There's a lot of other subtler things there, but you could be taking just a 2-minute break so I can get something to drink, and then we'll pick up with something very interesting that the ancients, we haven't really talked about what the ancients bring to the plate, that I think is very, very important. We'll touch on at least one of those things, which again can change the whole dialogue.
Oh, brilliant. Yeah, go right ahead. I'll actually just bring up the fact with the article. Let me just pull it up on screen so you can see this. So God in Ruins, this is something I believe, comes from Emerson, and I think Michael had Emerson quoted at the top here. Let me just scroll down a little bit. Yeah, well, that's it. Emerson, man is God in ruins. And I thought that was an interesting way to frame it, because we're kind of walking on a razor's edge with this in the way people perceive this subject, because you think, okay, we're told by sort of the mainstream that comes from the evolutionary view of man, the mechanical beast view of man, right? This is the ideology that is behind materialism. It's actually also behind people like Marx and some of these communistic ideologies and everything else, is that man is just an animal that needs to be restrained, it needs to be reprogrammed and trained and conditioned, and you need some level of rule of force over man, and you need central power and all these different things. This is ancient, right? Their view is that man was always in ruins. Man is a sort of a failed experiment to a degree. So these people believe that they have to fix man. And when they get in and try to fix, they get in there like it's like Dr. Frankenstein, right? You get in there and you completely re-engineer the mind. This is why you see all these programs and projects about how these intelligence agencies, and you go back to the Jesuits and all this, have been collecting all this data on the human psyche, because it's all about controlling consciousness and controlling the masses. And to some extent, you can get into the Hobbes view of this on a philosophical level. There's elements to it that don't match the way that they're bringing it forward, because I think there's a lot of manipulation involved. There could be a case to be made that man at a certain stage needs guidance, but guidance is a lot different than having dictatorial, tyrannous rulers, right? But anyways, this idea that man is a god in ruins changes that discussion from man is just a beast that needs to be controlled and has always been we crawled out of the slime and we crawled out of the jungle, and now here we are, we have civilization, so therefore let's make sure we keep man docile so that he doesn't become too animalistic and all that. It's a very negative view that this structure and the media and everything and academia has adopted, and it's a self-hating view. Whereas this view of Emerson, you could still say, well, we end up in the same place, because we see that, humanity as a whole, when you look at the big picture, the vast majority are still completely enslaved, and they're in ruins. But it's talking about a fall of man. It's saying that at one time, and Michael mentioned this earlier on, at one time we were more angelic in terms of our consciousness, in terms of our intelligence, and then we fell from a spiritual, psychological sense. Yeah, sure, maybe we built all this technology and we brought certain things, we've evolved in certain ways, but by and large, psychologically, spiritually, we're in decay in a lot of ways. And I'm saying this in general, of course, because there's always individual exceptions. But I found this to be a much better view, that man is a god in ruins, as Emerson said, because it gives a much more hopeful picture and a much more positive picture. And it also, when I hear that phrase, man is a god in ruins, it inspires me to not be in ruins and to instead find my divinity and find my potential. Whereas if somebody just says, it's all just nothing and it's materialist and your life is determined for you and, there's nothing special here. It's just about eat, sleep, shit, and die, life's a bitch until you die. That view doesn't have any hope for it whatsoever, and that kind of person that has lost all hope will sign on for controllers, external controllers in their life. They will sign on to be the slave, because they're like, yeah, you're right. I've always been fallen. There's no hope for recovery, so therefore it's so bad. I'll just acquiesce to whatever the people I think are the smartest intellectuals with big scientific degrees are going to say, or the priests, or whatever, the cult leaders. Just on and on. You can see this. So, and even the start of this article, which we're going to link below for you guys, saying that a few of the world's greatest thinkers refuted the common notion of ancient primitivism. He summed it up in one sentence, what I was trying to say. They understood that prehistoric man was not the bestial creature beloved of historians and history books. Social critics such as William Blake, Julius Evola, Schwaller de Lubitsch, Rudolf Steiner, Helena Blavatsky, and many others seriously doubted the historical record, pointing to structures such as the Great Pyramid in Egypt as evidence of high prehistoric civilizations. Given that structures of similar majesty exist the world over and that there is no record of the antecedent stages of development essential for them, we are right and rational to doubt inadequate conventional attitudes about the past. So we have evidence, basically, we put all the works together of these great people, and these are people from the past, there are people in our current time that are analyzing this, and it's even starting to come out of the big academic circles, is that we have evidence that man was not always this primitive beast, that we had a way of looking at things that could even be argued to surpass the way we look at things today. And when we think of technology, people go, well, what about technological advancement? It's like, well, what kind of technology? What is technology? It's a tool to build with, right? So what kind of technology built the pyramids? It's also, it's not just about having the tools to build it, it's about having the ingenuity to build it, the conception to build it, to line these monuments all over, the places in Ireland, etc., to, all these astrological alignments and ley lines. That takes a level of intelligence that you can't find today. You can't walk up to your buddies and go, hey, let's go build something this week that will take, unimaginable amounts of ingenuity and resources, and we're just going to pile a bunch of rocks together in a way that'll defy the imagination of future generations. Or we're going to go and carve a temple out of a mountain somewhere. Let's just go this weekend, grab a couple beers, and go carve a temple out of a mountain. We're not going to see that. We're not going to see that. And we're not seeing a move to replicate any of these ancient structures. So we're seeing now, no, that's all old stuff. That's all we got. And now they want to tear it down. They're tearing all the stuff, get rid of history. We don't even want the history anymore. So those people that want to tear civilization down and tear down historical monuments and all that, that's definitely a sign of devolution. But then again, what about the people that are resisting that and don't want that and want to see a good future for mankind? So it's kind of a mixed bag. But anyways, Michael, welcome back. I was just kind of breaking down some of the entry points of the article and the God in ruins and how it's a more optimistic view of humanity, actually, even though it still gives you a really harsh diagnosis. Yeah, we're still in ruins, we're fallen, it's shit. But it gives you hope that, hey, if we were once at a higher level or a more complete, holistic, connected level, then maybe we could get back there again. And maybe not all of us, but at least maybe I could and you could. You know what I mean?
Or all people could.
Yeah,
Once
maybe.
you've entertained that idea, that could be the one radical idea we're all looking for. See, from an existential point of view, when people have any kind of problem in their life, especially something that involves their lower level on the hierarchy, right? And the need, oh, I've got so far to go. And even in terms of a society that has sort of understood its inadequacies, could that not be, and this is one of the reasons I put the article together, to say, look, could it not be that that's what it is? It's anamnesis, as Plato called it. All of those angsts, all of those meltdowns are born out of our actual subliminal admittance that we have fallen from a great height, and I'd love to get back to that gnosis. But let's talk about that in a minute. Let's hold off on that just a second, because that's key to this thing, right? But what I wanted to get to was that if de-evolution has happened, then, like I've speculated in other work, could the platform we're on now in the 20th and 21st century be the worst place to view the past, right? Now, I didn't say it was. I'm just saying, what I mean by that is that if devolution has taken place, then obviously as we degress, at later points of that process, it's worse. We're darker, not in the light. And therefore, when you do look back to earlier times, a weird interference pattern has now taken place, because they were always smarter than us, and we're getting dumber and dumber in essentials, right? On the surface, we still look like we've got science, technology, and maybe the super lit quality of that is precisely why it's so super lit, is to create it's like a window dressing, right? So maybe that's the window dressing as part of our own self-deception to keep everything looking like it's going at full pace scientifically. More rockets, more planes, more this, that, and the other. But that's just the disguise mechanism, right? That's just a wardrobe to hide the fact that we're really rotting and decaying inside. But the point I was thinking of making out of that is that then we have what's known as historical fallacy as one of the pieces of evidence of devolution. And therefore, any statement that we would ever make about the past, whether it's what I've seen people do with Celtic history, right, Irish history, or Native American history is by definition false. It's ideologically false. In other words, more simply said, if we have historical fallacy, the fallacy is that we feel that we can account accurately for anything that happened amongst the people of the past, right? And we're miles off, right? So you need to be able to have another group of people who can test for that. So even in the realms of science, it's far from objective and it's actually fallacious. What we say happened in a prehistoric time, what we say happened to this or that culture in its, in its own time is fallacious. It doesn't actually bear on really what happened. And so we're caught now in this loop where until we get out of historical fallacy, our own statements, right, are lined with issues and problems. So, that we have to talk about that. And then but even despite that, right, even despite that, when you go, because the only way out of that would be to go and really adhere, wouldn't it, to what, say, the tribal people, for instance, there's one way out of this, is to see what they say themselves, with the awareness that they're also contemporary with us and might be having historical fallacy. But of the two of us, it's less likely to be with them since it's of their cultures that they're speaking. All right, what do they say? The interesting thing is that they don't just talk about devolution in a straight sort of a way. They make absolutely sure that they're emphasizing the moral component of it all.
Right.
It's a moral declination. Yeah, right across the board. Now, I look at that and go, fuck me, did you need any more proof that there really was a devolution? Because the very fact that they say we're to blame is our ancestors who fell from the light. The Boxog admit this and others do. And the Native American Indians include themselves in the crime. Well, then they must be telling the fucking truth. Why? All these people go, they just made that up because they're envious of white men. Then why paint themselves as criminals in their convoluted story, fucking tube, meathead? If you're concocting a story from the off, you're going to make yourselves look good. You're not going to say, we're in the shit. And half the reason why we're tribal and we have millions of enemies and we're down here in the mud while all you guys are up there, is because a great falling off took place in ancient times. Hey, that looks like a straight confession. That sounds like contrition. That sounds like absolutely awesome confession, which you would hardly get from people who want to sell you something through a fake story of their ancestry, for fuck's sake.
Exactly.
Oh, not to mention the fact that they can take you by the fucking ear and point to ruins. That might also do something for that at Easter Island and wherever else, Tiahuanaco and the Anasazi ruins, just in case anybody wanted further, because all those kivas and those fantastic things that these Hopis and Navajos are living in, they don't build any new ones. If they knew how to build those kivas, and they look pretty simple, well, why have they never bought it? Why are they living in skin huts down on the valley? I've seen it with my own eyes. Because they didn't build them, that's why. Right? But the thing is, they're telling you they didn't build them that, So if anybody listening to this goes, what are you talking about all these primitives for? Sure, they're nothing but a pack of liars. Well, their script doesn't lead me to believe that at all. Adjunct to that is the whole idea that we have to ask the question, do primitive tribes actually, say an Aboriginal group or a Celtic group, have they ever really espoused the idea that they thought that they or their ancestors were thrown into the world as if it was some sort of, hellish place? Now, believe me, there are Gnostic, as you well know. There are groups across the board who are Gnostical who do believe that. But it's not general. It is not all tribes who have that same account. Right? First of all, some people don't even say that the world is lower in the classic Gnostic way. That's the first thing. And others don't think of it as being any kind of... they don't betray that same philosophy that the world is a vile, dark place into which they've been thrown. If they did, they wouldn't have such a reverence for animals, and they wouldn't have what we call animism. Why would you worship a mountain or a stone if you thought that thing was lower? There's groups out there who definitely don't act like they think anything is lower, not the animal forms. Far, 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 far from it. Well, it's because they're fucking hermeticists when you break it down, not Gnostics. Anybody know the difference? Right, well, the Gnostics certainly don't. They've poached so much stuff from Hermeticism that they can't even tell what's Gnostic about themselves and what's Hermetic. If you get into it, we're going to be doing stuff on that down the line. Shit, they can't even tell. They think they actually call themselves Hermeticists when they're not. Well, you've stolen so much It's all in your basement. What the hell? When the cops come around, they go, "Oh my God, look at all this stuff." But you're calling yourself a hermeticist. No, you're not. You're just a good thief. So then you have to say, devolution is somewhat mitigated against those tribes who had a very close relationship with the stuff of this earth and knew a lot about herbs and all the rest of it. So it's not buttoned down completely. And then the fallback position is what those tribes mostly say is it doesn't matter whether this world, they're not painting it in material, physical form of a devolution. It's a moral declination. Now, why would any group want to concoct some fairy tale which has so many elements of truth? Because it doesn't take very much to prove that there's been a moral declination.
We're living through one right now. There's a lot of parallels, and also the moral declaration, that brings in the force of will again, because that means that it was an act of choice.
It was an act of choice. Yeah. And we've looked at this in terms of priest to the illies. I can't tell you how many ways we've already looked at this question from different perspectives. And you bloody well have to. Keep it up. But see, then comes in a notorious philosopher, I say, Julius Evola. Again, another one of these people they name a proto-Nazi and all this nonsense, right? Proto-fascist. They have to categorize. Evola is of the opinion. Okay, now we touch on the thing that we left just slightly, in hiatus. And that is that, look, if all human neurosis, all of it, socio-political, economic, pathological, person's own particular depressions and hang-ups and all, Julius Evola was saying all of the world of the 20th century can be understood. All of its fallout, its rotten political systems, the total chaos is because we're in the ruins, right? Blake had a similar sort of take on it. And we're looking for those scraps of light. So you can't explain anything in a wholesale way about our world. You'll only be partly correct. But the one way to see it all is that because we have fallen from a Shangri-La, from a golden age, an Arctic homeland or whatever, what do you think would happen if that occurred again, right? Think of somebody falling into complete darkness at the bottom of a well. And all around him are the debris of what was. Not to mention he's also got the concussion. He's got the PTSD to boot, right? Which some people might just approach it from that point of view. In fact, your Julian James kind of did, right? All right, but in that chaotic state, the only thing that man will do is crawl around in the darkness looking for what might be remnants of, what was forgotten. So he finds a little broken amulet. He finds a little thing that used to be worshipped in the days of Atlantis, and he clings to it, right? He stuffs his pockets with all the debris. That's where we are now. And any kind of hang-ups or dysfunctions are all about because that's just still imperfectly done. So we are souls of the light, right, with broken wings, and we're in a state of total derealization because we have all of the, it's like a man having a car wreck and then having amnesia, right? He's off the fucking road. He's just driving, and he's going further out to the desert. And finally, the car runs out of gas. He climbs out, walks around, and wakes up in the morning, right? Completely heat struck. He's got heat stroke. He gets up. He doesn't know where he is. He's wearing this. He's in the middle of the desert, mind you, hundreds of degrees in the shade, right? And he's wearing this big overcoat, like for a winter city. He's holding a briefcase and walking around like a madman. Doesn't even remember his own name. Even if he pulls out his own driving license and looks at it and goes, who the fuck is that? Right? He musters about. He finds his car. He doesn't know where he is at. He doesn't know where he's going. That's the kind of creature we're talking about. Then, so that person slowly starts to regain his memory. So don't you see what Evola is saying? Is that that's what we are. We're mankind in amnesia. And in that state of amnesia comes all the ghosts and goblins, and he's haunted. He's haunted by everything. He's scared out of his wits. Therefore, all the psychological maladies that a Freud will have to pick up. Therefore, all the nightmare fears. Therefore, all the physical illnesses, right? I put this into the article as well. It's one proof of devolution is that how many simply physically maladies we are susceptible to. Like once we had a perfect immune system in the golden age, and now we're down here with the donkeys catching everything you can possibly catch. So there are a lot of interesting proofs for this. But just sticking with the theme that we're talking about, try to envision a human race as a single person reaching for the light, right? Trying to get back, and all of the, it's like climbing that snake back up to where we were. It's just impossible, right? It's so difficult to do. Yet we have flickers, and those are the types you're talking about. Those who've gone a little bit ahead and have a flicker, and then they sort of send it back down the line. And there's no doubt that there's that as well. But there's also the pig ignorance of everybody below in a devolved state, and all of their frustrations, and I mean all of them, sexual, emotional, whatever, from whatever school you come from now, right? Evelyn's going to look at you. Oh, you're a William Wright. I understand where you're coming from. What a rank? I got your number, right? Nobody else can come. There's not a person who can come along with their syndrome or critique of the world that an Evelyn is not saying, I know where that fits in. It fits in because we're devolved. And we're actually not progressing to do anything new, though we've entrained ourselves to believe that any new discovery we find is a sign of progress. He's saying it's a sign of recapitulation. Anamnesis is the term. Remembering. Right? Means doing it again. To reify. Right? So and this matters because if everybody, now the people listening to us, we're all getting it now. Can you imagine what this might do if, some Johnny jumped up on a TED talk or something and more millions got it? Because this might be one of the big missing pieces, actually. Who knows? But I know that on an individual level, certain philosophers and scientists do believe this. And they claim that it has helped their work. When you have these big metaphysical paradigms, and they're on the ground level doing it, I think Tolkien was one of these people. He was filled with a nostalgia that what he's saying and doing is recapitulation. And it made him commit even more. And there's other people who've harped on this, right, in different traditions. I think Gurdjieff was very much interested in this. Madame Blavatsky was absolutely motivated by this. So was Steiner. That there is nothing that we're teaching. There's nothing we could ever teach, right? The designers of the tarot and the great teachers of the tarot, right? Your MacGregor Mathers and your Aleister Crowley's. I think they were aware of it. That's why they knew about the symbolic archive. That's why they said, put it in pictures. Because it's reawakening, not just the intelligence by which the ego picks up a thing and runs with it and says, it's progress, it's progress. It's the deeper esotericist who says, I remember something. Like that amnesiac. And somebody come and go, it's me, remember? Right? And you go, no, you look familiar, right? Wow, what a mind-boggling. So as I say, even though I'm not 100% myself bought into it or anything like that, pieces of this theory are very, very intriguing. And it might be right, right? And then when you factor in these Michael Cremos and these people who have deep critiques of what we call evolution and the science, really, really palpable stuff. In fact, they've been hinterlanded from the mainstream science world because of what their work does. It compromises, right? That, and we're not even talking here about the sheldrake and the really deep rapport that we have, with reality. We're not even getting into all of that. We're just keeping it as simple as possible, like I do in the piece,
Well, that's great. I think it's amazing to open up these doors and, to come on Unslaved every week and have these amazing discussions where we can look at things from different angles. I mean, it's refreshing. You don't see that. You see you just completely regurgitating the same things over and over again. And in order to get new thought forms happening and bringing out new ideas, we have to look at things from different ways and go back and, as you say, recapitulate and try to look at a thing again. I do it in the other work that I do. I see it even as being a parent, it's you're constantly cycling back and analyzing, was that the right way to do it? Did I, and this is natural. So it is a natural function in us. So we have the potential to evolve ourselves or devolve ourselves. And because whatever we call society or the world is made up of all these individuals that are making choices to either I'm going to succumb to my fear and do whatever Big Brother tells me to do and what society tells me to do and parents and teachers and all that, or I'm going to work on evolving myself and going through the process that it takes in order to construct new ideas that might end up being wrong or might end up bringing me to a whole new level. But people are afraid to go on that journey because they're afraid of failure, they're afraid of looking bad in front of other people, they're afraid of espousing ideas that might later, I don't know, it's a fear in all of us. And but what these great teachers are trying to do is inspire us to say it's worth the journey, and this is something that you can take on board to take your power back. I mean, people are always asking us, Michael, we talk about all this stuff, what do we do about it? I think we've just given them the recipe, once again, that don't sit around and wait for everybody else to awaken. There might be a bigger process happening here than we're able to even comprehend. So focus on what you can do, and every time someone lately has been asking me on my social media, well, what do we do? I just try to tell them, well, think about that in terms of what are you going to do? I don't know. What do you do? What are your skills? What's your power? Don't ask whatever we're going to do. It's never going to be the we.
Get the we the fuck out of your vocabulary, and you're well on your way already. No, the nightmare fears are based in the idea that, see, if something happens, like, when a bomb went off in the streets of Ireland or wherever, everybody gets really nervous, right? So when this great fall took place, it left a trace of great fear. So the fear is a rational fear. There's one other thing to get. That when you see people resisting change or moving out into a field where the collective isn't following them, where the we doesn't belong, that fear that arises is rational fear, actually. Because what is the natural response to a massive cataclysm? Be it a cometary action or some other, action that then is the cause of the devolution. It left the trauma I've been talking about in all my career. And therefore, not everybody's going to be able to heal. I've always described the modern time as being a sort of a healing curve, right, as we move forward. And then, of course, that always then brings us up to the agents of control and propaganda who, knowing that we're traumatized, want to keep us in that state. So now we're dealing with another phenomenon we haven't touched on yet in this conversation about being made primitive. It's not that man was primitive or is primitive, it's that he's being kept primitive. Aided and abetted by a physical thing that happened, but the soothsayers, the priesthood of the Illies, whatever you want to call them, right, they came in and said, this is just great, right? Because it affected them more than it affected us, let's get in there. So it's a shaman class who turned evil. Tolkien talks about it in clear language, right? And that being, that shivering being, was left to the four winds. We're still being left to materialism now. There's still people back there who would love to leave us, the Bill Gates types and those people, just vaccinate their asses, just get them in line. Why are they not wearing gray? What's wrong with you people, right? Why haven't you got a number on your fucking forehead, So there's people out there who just want us to be there thinking it's good for us. They don't think, they're not really tyrannical because it says for your own good. And people are starting to think, say that again? That kind of makes sense. Yeah, I'll sign up for that. You think I'm out there going to fucking help people like that? They're going to sell us all out tomorrow? So there is that hidden hand that doesn't want us remembering. Then there's the psychological component, which has been mostly the focus of my work, which is that most people can't go where I'm talking about because of the fear reaction. It's like a kind of rebirthing, right? No, that's not of interest of anybody because it would mean waking up the great wounds, which the shaman class did with their neophytes by putting them into dangerous situations. Just read Ursula Le Guin, her, Earthsea trilogy. I'll put the link below in case anybody hasn't bothered reading it, right? It's a great book like Bard by Morgan Llewellyn. It gives you an insight into the extraordinary trials, right, of the neophyte in these societies. Well, why were the societies doing this? Well, because they didn't believe in progress. They believed in reawakening what was. A very different experience. It's an underworld experience by default. It's cobwebs and coffins and Masonic rituals by default. And that's because all of the races of the world understood this. That's why Richard Casaro can notice, oh, you got the fucking same patterns everywhere. Why are you all guys using the three?
Right.
Well, because they're all coming from the same Gnostic archive, Gnosis archive, not Gnostic. They're coming from the same paradigm of the exact same things that happen, and the same restorative is being administered. And so, of course, the symbolic archive is going to have so much synergy, and similarity, and that's where that's all coming from. And the specialness of certain numbers, and a certain vibrations, many of them healing. Remember, the healing of the earth was also very important. So when people look at megaliths and even the pyramid, we can't fathom today that might have been born out of an instinct to heal the earth. Yeah, you're telling me it's fear. You're telling me ancient man was just crippled by fear. But you never, in the same breath, then say the building of the pyramid doesn't look like fear. It looks more like awe, more look like wonder, looks like astonishment, and best of all, not fear, with reverence. See how I'm talking about paradigm busting ideas? Instead of looking at man crippled by fear, and believe me, fear was definitely an issue. We've just explained why. But that does not mean that he then did not have much more sophisticated, empathic, right, resonances and comportments, including deep reverence for the animal kingdom, deep reverence for, the universe. Do you think that astronomy, do you think that observing precession of the equinoxes is out of fear and survival? Keep thinking that if you want. Right? Do you think that any of the stuff that they've done that is grand, building of Avebury and Stonehenge, is born out of any kind of fear? It's got to do with reverence and maybe showing the gods. If the gods were wrathful against you, there's a certain rational fear there. And then there's also reverence to say we're going to build things and we're going to demonstrate that we're back in alignment, with the gods, and we're going to have rituals and supplications and maybe the odd sacrifice, right? We're going to do all of these things not because we're bloodthirsty and primitive, but we're trying different ways to, appease or, mollify the gods. Now, this is where Julian James comes in as well. He's important along with Julius Evola, because he is clearly saying, and this ties into something in the latest article, and that is that in this process, when we were traumatized at the bottom of the well, we no longer heard the words of instruction. The hierarchy of a tribe was broken. We're all in a state of Gollum-like psychosis, right? We're down there licking our wounds and all the rest of it. And so any kind of hierarchy between the elders, the ancestors, whatever, is now broken and smashed. So we don't hear the guidance. So Julian James is coming along and talking about a bicameral period in which we were so hungry for that instruction. And this would have been a very, holy instruction. One can look at it that way. And then because we weren't getting it, we then came up with the age of the priests, right, who would now take over that instruction. We also created divination, gone into this in other works. But we also became pathologically addicted to the words of another, right? Overly so. Because, I said, it's natural to be so. It's actually has a good effect, right, when you're being dragged, when you're being pulled upwards. But the pathological aspect is our own obsession with the words, advice of others, because it overwrites our intelligence. That's not the same thing as an empathic connection. Because empathy, as we said earlier, can't even exist for the other unless you have it toward yourself. Well, if you have it towards yourself, it goes without saying that you won't allow anything to overwrite your own identity, would you? So the pathological part is when I lock in with the words and advice of an elder or something, I'm not doing it so that this Ramana Maharishi or Sai Baba can fucking program the shit out of me. But because I am empathic, because I'm also first empathic with myself, I have my values and my needs. I've locked in with his or hers, and now we both grow. The pathological side is what we've got. So that comes out of the other, right? In seeking for the truth again, we overly became obsessed, and Julian James does not talk about this. He talks about all these other fantastic things. So, I believe I've progressed with his work to show that the pathological, psychological obsession with guidance from other lost souls is this. And that's why you go towards an Anthony Robbins and types like that. And I'm not just focusing on him. I'm talking about all the priests, all the gurus, all the Jesus freaks, right? All of it. The teachers, why we even have instruction. Because as Steiner and Krishnamurti pointed out, there's a whole other way of instructing children that has no bearing on what we've got today. So it's not like I'm just talking, nonsense and have nothing to put in its place. Remember, was it you who said at the other interview that we teach children how to think, what to think, but never how to think, right? You stressed that again, and that's true. So there's a whole different way of a child's awakening its own awareness, so that any new discoveries that enter the child's consciousness, any discovery at all, right, any interest that it has, must be an extension, an emanation of its own true core interest, not an imposition from the outside. This is what you should be interested in. This is what you should do. The normal adultism that is ubiquitous today. But coming back to the point, we have overly locked in to the consensus. It's one of the sinews of collectivism because of the devolution. So unlike Michael Cremo, like I said, he's just got one take. It comes from the Vedic Hindu perspective. Shit, I'm at it from 100 other perspectives. It's not to demean that work. That work is essential. It's a good way into what I'm talking about. But again, we need to broaden it out. The Celts have their say, the Scots, the Finns, the Native American Indians all have their own take of what it meant. Some talk about it as a fall of an actual Arctic homeland in a very physical sense. But then, as I said, don't ever forget that many of them speak more about a moral declination. And to me, that means that it's true, that there may have been a devolution then, because who would concoct a story that had their own moral inferiority or moral crimes recorded as part of that story? That doesn't sound like somebody who's making up a story. That sounds like somebody who's being contrite, who realizes we've fallen from a great height and is doing their best to teach the world how to restore it through moral, right, turpitude, rectitude, same way that Evola was doing. Now, just to finish the thing on Evola, though, when he looked around the world, he said, fuck, we fucked it up. When he looked around at the 20th century, he said, the thing I was telling you to do, to get back to educational structures and political structures that would rebuild us back to the point, like in the Rainbow Song Stargazer, we're building the temple and we're getting higher up into the clouds, but you botched it. And his ways was, we're not going to get into it now, but democracy, fail, socialism, feminism, right? All those are fails. So people who don't understand this Evola, when he's talking endlessly about masculinity and the power of the male, and hierarchy, they're coming at it so stupidly. All that was his proviso to say you must have this structure, masculine structure, to in any way get up to the level where the gods. And that's why he had a different take on why priests exist, why kingship exists. Fantastic stuff, but you'll never understand it. And his book was called Man Amongst the Ruins, right? So he was trying to talk about how to rebuild it, explain what we've explained about devolution, then explain how to get back. And unfortunately, he said that there's been a horizontalization where, unfortunately, the feminized political systems, feminized thinking has botched it. And he looked back to those, he looked back with longing to different cultures, who had it more right in his ideas, but they were sabotaged and destroyed. And then things like matriarchy came to play, So if you want to understand that man's work, this is the way to understand it, is that he had a particular interest in what might reavail. So it's not perfect in itself, but at least it's one way, he said, the key way to get back to the way it was. He had his script on that. And it's wrong to be calling him names, because just like anybody, he was very aware of the effects and after effects of devolution, and he had his own particular insights, as to how that would be restored. And now you can understand his comments, as you could with, say, a Satravit Devi and others as well. You can understand where they're coming in with those theories.
Yeah, it's happened to so many of these thinkers, is that they try to work with an idea and then come up with a solution, and then they just get lambasted with all these names, because that's how you control information. That's how you deter people from looking into certain fact. I mean, we've been talking lately on my show about all the fact checkers and all that showing all their connections to certain institutions that are all funded by the same people that have a vested interest in misinforming you about these different subjects that are going on right now. And so they're not really fact checkers at all. They're not there for the truth. They're there to corral thought and bring out some kind of tyranny, where it's the same thing they've been doing, the mythmongers, back to frickin' ancient Rome and Greece, and the whole thing we've done with Ralph Ellis about how they've tried to slander anybody that goes against the canon or whatever. It's the same type of modus operandi. And so what happens is that we don't get access to these different kinds of ideas, even if maybe not the whole idea is where it needs to be, but it's what starts these are pioneers. These are people that start us into this way of thinking so that we can get down to these truths. And so, people shouldn't be dissuaded by, actually, nowadays when I look up authors and I look up ideas, I just look at who does the mainstream throw the most arrows at? Who do they destroy the most? Who do they try to attack their personality, their character, the whole thing? And especially when they don't provide any facts. And if they're just screaming bloody murder about somebody, I want to read those books. I want to get into that. I want to learn about it and see what's going on, because there are people who are trying to protect their worldview. And there's money involved, there's power involved, there's politics involved. And so we can't just be so easily swept aside when we're investigating these things to go, oh, well, Snopes.com says this guy's a far-right Nazi or whatever, then I'm not. It's like, no. Today, the people yelling Nazi, Nazi are the frickin' Nazis, and that's the world we live in. So let's go to these great minds and at least extrapolate their ideas find out what resonates, what maybe doesn't work, and keep it eclectic so that the truth is ultimately the goal, right?
Yeah, look at the ideology behind fact-checking. It means then that what you're talking about is that there's some definitive knowledge that is unchanging and factual that you know about and everybody else doesn't. And you're sitting there on your high fucking chair, first of all lying to say that all knowledge is static and fixed. Sure, hasn't quantum science already showed you that in the highest kind of science, that's not the case? How can it be the case any further down the line? Like I said, we're resetting. We're going back to zero. Quantum science, the latest, biggest paradigm that in the 20th century and 21st century, has utterly shown that all knowledge is merely probabilistic, which said another way means it's not fixed. It's not certain and is ever changing. Well, where have you been, Zuki and co? Where have you come from? I know, the world of fascism that says that behind your iteration is a fact that only we, the boss hogs, he's been watching too many, anime cartoons. It's gone to his head. Some overall, he's Lord Muck, who's now going to tell everybody else. And they're all infected with this because that's tyranny. Remember, they've got a tyrannous kind of consciousness, right? They've got that psychology. When I said earlier that the real reason why theories like devolution or any of the other alternative theories are so impalatable to people today is because of their fear, right? But the thing is that the fear of the modern cannot be addressed to the modern. Right? Because one part of the fear is a sort of a capsule. It's like with a mosquito. Before it sucks your fucking blood, it puts inside you an anesthetic. Right? This is the first action. It spits into you a anesthetic that numbs the wound. It numbs the bite, and then it can suck you dry. This is the basic way that's happening today, right? So this is what happens. You have to, the person has got a capsule of cognitive dissonance already, you see, to swallow what they've swallowed. And so you're up against a real difficult problem trying to deal with that level of reality distortion. And all that to understand our world is just that reality distortion is like a sleeping dragon, right? Sometimes it's half awake, sometimes it's really severe, and then sometimes it's a little bit less. But it's always there. It's just sometimes the mercury is risen, and sometimes it's not. And this can be in your personal life with people you know, or even in a social context. But never forget that any comment then about ancient man's thinking, ancient man's beliefs, is highly impaired by where we are now and who's doing the speaking. And the person who's saying they were riddled in fear, animals, right? The bolt-wielding gods, right? They were scared of everything. Yeah, and what are you fucking scared of? And we've just gone through a list, right? Of the very idea of returning to a great gnosis, but in the way as a debris that frightens you, and then your own conditioning, your own fear of leaving the herd, your own fear of breaking the trance and the consensus, all of these matter. And that's what even stops you doing what you just said. For them to go and look at other evidence or read a great master's work, and they're spitting poison, right? At all of these people, all the people that I mentioned, all the people I deal with, are completely taboo, including these Wilhelm Reiches and everything else, right? But that fear makes our platform today one of the worst, points for looking back. And unless you adopt a kind of a outlook that I do, right, then you won't see the past. So I'm using clear lenses, like your Manuel Velikovsky's, like your Julian James's. That's why I don't have any prejudice about who I'm working with, because they're all lenses to me that, put in the right direction. You make the perfect telescope to look into the deep past and come up with something that has forensic credibility and also makes rational credibility. And in the final, silver bullet is that it makes sense of today and why people have the cognitive dissonance. So it's recursive. That what you find out from a truer, pure world is elixir that has made you, it's like those glasses and they live. Oh, now I fucking know why. Right? Yeah, it's called reality distortion, monodeism, right? It's called, cognitive dissonance, whatever you want. But see, again, back, and then the final point really is that nothing we've just discussed about devolution in ancient times and tribes is outside, helping us today. Because if devolution is an ongoing process, then it pertains to what we're heading to around the corner in our times. It pertains to where we are right now and what our own future may be. So this is not by any means a dead subject or unimportant. Even the events that we're seeing today, we don't actually know, is it going to heal and go back to normal next year? And even if it does partially, surely we must know that the rumblings of it are still there below, even though we may again get entrained back into, social norms again. We still got to marry. We still got to, have graduations. We still have to bury our dead, right? So a lot of stuff might come back online. But what my message always to any audience I'm talking to is always take notes and remember these crucial times, because your amnesia will check in again and you'll forget most of the key things about this time. Don't do that. And then even more importantly, what we're talking about now is if we're continuing to devolve, that's not a very good sign. So what you need to do is to keep your eyes open for devolution. And 2020 looks like a really good time to start doing that, wouldn't you say? Since a lot of social structures are ultimately, if they're not fading away and passing away, they've certainly had a real heavy-duty kick in the balls, right? Now, granted, they're only social structures. So that's why, to me, I'm not in any shape or form, suicidal or whatever you want to call it, or even vaguely pessimistic. That's not where I'm coming from. There are, after all, only constructs. Many of them which need to be revised, and and there's that whole question of maybe this is happening because something is happening in the stars to help us build from ground up. And I personally am very good at that, so I don't see any bother with that at all, right? But again, looking outside that context, could this be a big sign that devolution is really kicking in? And as I said, Michael Creamer left it where he left it. He's probably not going to make any further. So we have the right to then take it a little bit further, keep the question alive, and start asking about our times as well. Always with the silver lining that when a thing burns down, it's the perfect time to build it again. I'm not being fatalistic here, right? That's a law anyway. Right? The law of attraction may not be a real law, but this is, and that is something when it burns down to absolute zero, actually is a sign of building it again stronger the next time over, right? I mean, that's just basic, for fuck's sake. So maybe, I'm looking at that. And then we're looking at all these other things I've explained. We're not going to go into it again, of the silver linings, in regards to communism and Islam and all of these other things, that a lot of things today could be explained by. So there's no reason for any pessimism. But today we've looked at a very broad scale, swathe of history in a different context, that instead of evolution, which is something we've really entrained ourselves into thinking, it doesn't have any credibility, and we've looked at the fact that if very, very complex structures and complex thought and complex civilizations existed in prehistoric times, why don't we remember it? And we went into that. And then we also looked in that even though we're not consciously aware of that, in a way, all of our so-called progress is now recontextualized, not as actual progress as we think it. It's a remembrance. It's a restoration. It's a recapitulation of great things. I'm all for it, right? But when that orientation, if children were brought up to believe that we are handling the debris, this is what Blake was all about, you're handling the debris of an ancient world. It's like when you go way into the desert and you start finding shells and scallop shells. And you're thinking, what the hell, right? You see? That's what I mean about children having a deeper fascination. Instead of being committed to Faustian progress in every sense, if they were brought up to believe that you're rebuilding, but you're rebuilding better, which is what alchemy is about, right? The negredo, the carbon, and then you're building a higher form. Yeah, that carbon was compressed out of a previous epoch. There is no knowledge. There's only standing on the shoulders of giants. There is no fucking knowledge that you have that wasn't already thought out by somebody fucking 10 times smarter than you, right? And cultures that were greater than you. And we still, in some sense, have a little sensory something, very faded, very blocked, very, occluded. But we still have a little antenna when we go to certain places and we take it in, that we have that nostalgia. It's called nostalgia, the great nostalgia, where we breathe in, just like the rain is a precipitate, right, of water that was once down on the earth, and it comes back to us in another form in the cycle. We have a historical amnesia, but we also have a flicker. Every now and again, we have a little flicker of what was. And we have to sort of rekindle that. It's one of the great things that education isn't doing, because it sold us to the idea of Faustian progress. And as you said, there are people out there who can completely, deeply critique that. We're not going to get into that now. But also just in your own heart, try to sensitize yourself for that ancestral voice. It's been proven by the top neuroscientists, by the way. Right? Greg D. Jacobs, what's his name? Gazzaniga, your fucking McGilchrist. They're all hovering about this. Charles T. Tart, Rupert Sheldrake, they're all hovering around. Some of them a little bit more tentative than others, but basically, look, as far as we're concerned, it's out there. It really is. That there is an ancestral memory, call it the right brain, the deep centers, right? And they are susceptible, like your back brain, right? They contain those memories, those whispers. And your Mann Blavatsky's and your Steiners, for all of the different, dressing on the top and some of the bizarre elements, actually deep down inside, they're all looking into that question in their own ways about that, and also they've come up against a lot of the different barriers, right, that exist cognitively between that, all the different nightmare fears and traumas we spoke of. That's all there too. So it's not just an easy route back to those places, right? Like the movie Altered States has clearly shown, right? Because you got to pass by the monkey. You got to pass by the idea that we are primitive and we're just up from the soup, up from the slime, and that our primates are exactly the same as us and all the rest of it. And your Owen Barfields and all these people just shot that down in flames. But you haven't heard about them, right? So in our show, we're meant to drag it all out and make you aware of all of the people who have these contrary theories so that you now have it in your basket and you can go out and, post these books around, post videos, share things that get it out into the mainstream. Don't break your balls and sweat for the, like Nietzsche said, don't kill yourself over the sufferings of other people, but have enough empathy to realize, there's a little bit, I can put it out here, not violating their free will, right? Not violating their ontological free will to suffer, to learn how to deal with suffering, and then to turn in those dark nights of the souls to these authors, that we make so much of, and you haven't violated their free will. You've allowed a lot of room for them to dive in and find it themselves, and that's more empowering than you enforcing it, imposing it on their minds. You see, it's just a conversation. You just chuck them a book or a website, and then you're there for them should they have, further issues. That's all I've ever done, is try to structure things that way. But I don't want to interfere with the journey, right, of the masses, or, all their highways and byways, all their learning curves, all their mistakes and errors. Because number one, I don't believe in mistakes. I just believe in challenges, right? I have a very, very masculine approach to life, a very, very anti-feminized and non-feminine way of looking at things. I don't coddle people, don't mollycoddle them, not even with this great knowledge. And I don't sell them the words of the geniuses for free and for cheap, because I know what will happen there, right? So there's a certain reverence I have for these ancients and these great truth-sayers of the past, and their work needs to be reverenced. And I have my way of doing it. Other people will have their way of doing it. But it's all philosophia, right? Love of wisdom. That's what it basically boils down to.
Well done. I'm with you on that, and that's what makes this project so great. Is that that's what this platform is. People can come and go as they please. Without them, we're not here, so we thank everybody for their support. But in the same way, I mean, we could do this in a billion other ways as well. And in the end, this is a work of love, and this is how we're contributing back. And I've learned so much doing this, and so great job on the article. Fantastic points, lots to think about, that's for sure, especially in context of what's happening right now. Might give people some perspective. We're going to continue some of these discussions next week. We have Caroline Riley coming back on. Probably getting more into the shadow and some other great subjects that she covers. She's been doing really great work. We got some other fantastic guests booked here as well on Unslaved. So lots to look forward to, lots to think about. We'll link everything below for you guys. Thank you, Michael, and thanks everybody for tuning in. And we'll catch everybody again here next week on Unslaved. Have a good one. Cheers.